Oh,
Hi, Fred.
Lloyd, I wrote this one just for you. He's not even looking. There you go.
I'll distract myself so I can see.
I'm trying to show you mine, but I can't get it to appear.
It was invisible.
It is. We'll fix that. We need one more, right? Let's see if Doc Stitter.
Representative Larson, it looks like we are live on YouTube.
Hello, everybody in YouTube land. For those with Myers Anderson and then probably Mr. O'Neill, City of Evanston and Strategy 5, I think we got Blindberger, Mr. Blindberger or Miss Blindberger, I don't know which, from Strategy 5 LLC. We're just waiting for another member of the task force to join up. We have to have a majority before we can be honest about our meeting. So patience, please. We apologize for the slow start. Danny Air will be on just a little bit. He's traveling. There's Doc Stitter. Hello, Senator President Doc Stitter. How are you?
Afternoon, all.
Senator Doc Stitter, we've got Representative Air will be joining us a little bit. We'll have a little flexibility if you need to jump on and off. Appreciate you coming on to where we had have a quorum here that we can get started. We have some folks in the waiting room here a little bit. For those watching this Zoom meeting live and those who are waiting in the waiting room to participate, this is a joint legislative and executive task force on the Department of Health Facilities meeting. The meeting today will be to listen to the Anderson-Meyer report, which is a culmination of an effort really headed by Senator Schuler and Rocco O'Neill in Evanston to do an assessment of the historic buildings at the state hospital that were scheduled to be demolished as part of the state hospital renovation plan. So Leanne, if we could take roll, and then there's a few comments that I'd make, and And likewise, Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Dockstader, if you've got some thoughts, I'd appreciate those as well. So Leanne, if you'd take roll, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Baldwin,
He answered.
I'm here.
Senator Schuler,
Here.
Representative Air,
Excused for a little bit.
Representative Nicholas,
Excused.
Co-Chairman Dockstader,
Here.
Co-Chairman Larson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
And then we also have the interim director for the Department of Health, Stephen Johansson, who is assigned to be to this committee as well. And we've excused the other member of that, at least at this point, Mr. Mel Muldrow, who is the deputy director for the State Department of Construction. And for this body, I might just mention that Mel announced in his in our State Building Commission meeting his retirement over the next couple of months. So we'll miss him. He's been involved in this process immensely and appreciate all the work that he's done and send our appreciation out to him. So maybe if I may, I'd like to just give this committee a little background that might help you understand a little bit this the discussion this meeting when the Health Facility Task Force went through through a long process starting in 2014 to get to the point we are now to have new buildings in Evanston at the state hospital and in new buildings in Lander at the Wyoming Life Resource Center. The question always was what to do with the buildings that we vacated. And the decision on that really had been to demolish the buildings, to raise them, largely because the initial indications of those buildings were such that it wasn't conducive to benefit the state in renovating them or restoring them back to good health. It just wasn't cost effective. And that's what moved us to the direction of the new construction. When we started the process in Evanston, we were approached, Representative Nicholas and I were approached one day by representatives from the city of Evanston and asked how big a hurry we were in to get the buildings at the state hospital demolished, because there was interest there to perhaps looking at other uses for those buildings that might be beneficial to the community and reinforcing the historical significance that those buildings have in the area. They've been there a long time and are really part of the landscape. There wasn't a hurry to do that, and we postponed any effort to start the demolition process. The question then was to figure out what to do with those. When Mr. O'Neill came forth and I think recommended that perhaps a study ought to be done, Senator Schuler carried the water on that, and we got some appropriations for the city of Evanston to look at this study and really see how feasible or what it would take and the potential of these buildings into the future of the state of Wyoming. And so we'll come back and we'd like to have a report on that and some conversation on that today. Chairman Dockstader, is there anything else you would add to that? Maybe he's not. Senator Dockstader, any comments you'd like to make?
No, go ahead. Sorry, I had to turn down a scanner that was being too loud.
Okay, thanks. With that in mind, then, I think Senator Schuler, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of turn some time over to you, and maybe you could introduce Mr. O'Neill and our folks here from Myers Anderson, and we could just go into the presentation of that report. Wendy, I might add that just for the committee's benefit, that now that we're getting ready to move into the new administration portion of the state hospital, the final building that's currently of those historic buildings that is being used will be vacated. Director Johansson, working with A&I, looking at the requirements to maintain those buildings, really has made a decision to mothball the buildings and not to keep maintenance, because that becomes an expense back to the Department of Health. And that's an important component of this conversation that the consultants will bring forth. But just so the folks here kind of understand the conversation that's taken place, is that accurate, Director Johansson?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. And I think we've communicated throughout this process that while the demolition of the buildings is, as you mentioned, there's not a date certain for that to happen. We will, once we are fully out of the old campus, which right now it's just administrative staff, that will start moving into the new buildings in the month of November. We will essentially mothball, board up those remaining buildings in the first of the year in 2022, because as you mentioned, the staffing and maintenance expenses do begin to add up, and we're unable to perform that level of maintenance.
Thank you. Okay, Wendy, Senator Schuler. You're muted. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to be here today and to share a few minutes with the rest of you today. I really, I wouldn't say that I carried the water for this project. I have been quite engaged with a number of legislators, though, in asking what are we going to do with the old state hospital. I think from the time I got elected, I started asking folks, does anybody have a plan? You know, do we know what we're going to do with it? And most of the time, everyone was really quite polite and just said, well, you know, we're really focused on getting into the new facility. And I understood that, and that needed to be the focus. But, you know, we're at that point in time now where we've got the new facility up and running, and it's turned out really well, I might add. But so in the interim, and as the chairman said, the city of Evanston, particularly Rocco O'Neill and Mika Madrid, did a great job of getting on board with getting some funds so that we could do a targeted market analysis of the buildings and the area. And we have had a couple of other, the downtown Main Street folks also did a survey a couple of years ago. So I've been kind of seeing the demise kind of some of these buildings just in the last 3 years as we've gone up there and done tours, and just kind of seen as we've started moving people out, how fast it's deteriorating. So a lot of my constituents from both the city of Evanston and the county have asked me a number of times, you know, what are we going to do? What's going to happen with State Hospital? And I just said, I know there was money set aside at one time for demolition. And I said, I'm asking a lot of questions, but I think we're just kind of in that mode where it's not the top priority right now. The top priority is getting the folks into the new facility. And even though I understood that, I think it was important that we did this targeted study of the facilities to see, you know, where we were in terms of could some of these be saved? Could some of these be rehabbed? Do they all need to be, you know, demolished? It's a beautiful campus, and a lot of people in our community as well as our county understand that, and they see that beautiful campus, and it's kind of a gateway, really, coming from the east side. People see that before they see our town, and so we just didn't want to see it just be left there to fall apart without having, you know, making some kind of an effort. So with Rocco O'Neill and Mika, I think are the two folks that I would give really the most credit to. Even though I've asked a lot of questions, they've done a lot of the groundwork, and got Myers Anderson, who is, you know, they've done a great job in years past with things here. And so I would introduce them real quick around the room if it's okay. Rocco O'Neill is our, what's your title now? Community Development Director. Okay. And Mika Madrid, who's a grant writer, but she's really, you know, jack of all trades. She can do a little bit of everything. She's here. We also have our steering committee members, and we also have one of our city council members, Tim Otley's here as well. And so Jim Davis is on the State Historic Preservation, and he's been a really active member, and he was also a former big guy, I guess you'd say, back in the day. How many years did you serve the city of Evanston? 27. So he's been around the block a few times, and he probably knows those buildings as well as anybody here in the room, and what our campus is all about and what it means to our city. And Richard Faith is here. He actually just came on board this year, and he works with the University of Wyoming Extension and is a very valuable part of our community. And it's been nice to have his input as well. And of course, Senator Baldwin here to my right. So we have some cool people here that I think have done some really great things and have been valuable members of our community and had some really valuable voices in terms of their thoughts and their ideas. I'll turn it over to Jerry or Rocco. I don't know which one of you guys wants to introduce Jerry's team. Do you want to do that, or do you want Jerry to do that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
I can take that.
thank you.
I'm not new here, so I apologize if there's anything. So, yeah, thank you, Senator.
So, Mr. O'Neill, is that you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you snuggle up to the microphone a little bit? We can't hear you very well.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Can you hear me?
We can, but there's a pretty significant echo. We'll work through this. Just
I'll turn it clear off.
All right. Is that better?
thank you.
Okay. I apologize about that. I'm not very technologically capable here. Yeah, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for your time today, and thank you to Senator Schuler and is it Senator Baldwin? Yeah. For being here in person today. My name's Rocco O'Neill. Like Senator Schuler mentioned, I'm with the city of Evanston, and I'm going to be brief. I'm going to let the experts talk here, but I'm going to give kind of an introduction to the project from the city's perspective, and I'm going to speak for the county too, because it's October, so a lot of us are out hunting. I just got back out of the winds here a few hours ago, so I apologize, but this is an important project for the city of Evanston. The Wyoming State Hospital has been a pillar in our community for over 100 years. In fact, it was funded in 1886 by the Wyoming Territorial Legislature, and it only cost them $30,000. So those buildings, many of those buildings were designed by world-renowned Cheyenne architect William Dubois, and they still sit up on the hill, and they're really kind of a symbol of the continuity of Evanston and the role that they've played in Evanston's history, and not only Evanston's history, but Wyoming's history. I'm obviously biased. I grew up in Evanston and I live here now, but I don't think you can tell the story of Wyoming without telling the story of the Wyoming Insane Asylum, which is now known as the Wyoming State Hospital. Between Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch and plenty of other important Western figures, that place has stories to tell. And it's the place that is the most recognized to folks as they drive through Evanston. It's the first significant historic site you see coming into Wyoming from the western part of the U.S. And I don't want to turn this into a historic preservation convincing meeting here. I'm sure you're all aware of the power and the magnitude of those buildings, but yeah, I'll get on into the economic development side. We, as a city, saw a unique opportunity up there with the historic campus. There's 30 plus buildings, 500,000 plus square feet of space up there. And in today's economic development environment, it's hard to find property with physical buildings on it that we can use as speculative economic development driving projects. And so we thought instead of knocking those buildings down, why don't we look at it from the economic development side of things, look at it as an opportunity rather than a burden, I suppose. And not only that, but pair it with the historic preservation side of things and really turn it into something that the legislature, the UNT County and the city of Evanston can be really proud of. And so I won't go too far into that. I'm going to introduce Jerry Myers of Myers Anderson Architects. They're the firm that we selected to help us with our feasibility and assessment of the Wyoming State Hospital Historic Campus. And again, we went out and got funds from the Wyoming Business Council and the Economic Development Administration at a federal level to evaluate this property, because that's how much we believe in this property, and we're all in. So without further ado, I guess I'll let the
Mr. Chairman, could I interrupt for just 1 second?
Senator Schuler, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did forget someone in our group here today. I don't know how I forgot her, but Kylie Ingersoll is here representing Wyoming Business Council. And she's another valuable person that I don't know how I missed her. She's straight across from me over here, but I just wanted to make sure and mention she's in the room, and she's done a great job on our steering committee as well. Thank you.
and Bridger Fates is here with the University of Wyoming. She got that?
I actually got him.
You got
I just
it?
forgot
Well,
Kylie.
I'm going to emphasize him again. I apologize.
Sorry, I'll make sure.
If we
But
can,
I'll let,
just a little
I'll
bit,
let it-
Rocco,
take it
you'll
over.
just need to understand this
So,
is a legislative
Jerry?
meeting, and so is your comment. You need
Are
to,
we
before you do that, you'll need to go through me. And so we understand it's not the end of the word, but we're just trying to keep a little decorum there. Kylie, we appreciate you being here. But also like to welcome Representative Ayer. He made it. So Leanne, if you would make note of that. So Mr. O'Neill, back to you, please.
Uh-oh, we had some technical. Co-Chair Larson, I apologize. Can you repeat that, sir?
No, we're just reminding you to go through the chairman when you speak. And if you're ready to bring Myers Anderson on, that'd be great. You can introduce those, and then we'll turn the time over to them.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jerry?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Jim Larson.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you today and be able to present to you some of the findings that we've come to in working with the steering committee to look at this facility that has so much potential. What I'd like to do, a couple of questions. Have you all had a chance to gander through the report that we did and brief through that? Okay, very good. I just want to thank Senator Schuler and the committee for all of their hard work and for their commitment and compassion to this project. And while I know Rocco's feelings and Jim's in particular relative to the historic preservation of this campus, I want to assure you that as I go through what we're going through in this report, what we're looking at is historic preservation is not very good if there isn't a good way to fund it and a good way to sustain it. And so I want to assure you we're keeping that in mind as well. Do I have the ability to share my screen here?
Leanne, can you answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, he should have the ability. Let me double check that really quick.
Sure, it says I'm disabled. Excuse me.
Looks like we're moving in the right direction there, Jerry.
There. Chairman Larson, can you see my screen now?
We can, and we can see you. So please proceed.
Excellent, thank you. So just a couple of points that, in fact, let me back up. I think it's important to just to reiterate the purpose of and the goals that the steering committee is looking at. The primary purposes were in the beginning, and I think it's worth mentioning those to preserve and protect the historic and economic opportunities here on this campus, and that they provide to the community and to the state, and to also provide a current assessment of these buildings and relative to their proposed use and repurposing the buildings as well. And then also helping the steering committee to develop a vision for this plan. We'll share a little bit of that as it's starting to formulate with you. And then, as I mentioned, sustainability is critical. And so we've got to have a strategy for how do we fund this and how do we use it in the future in maximizing its potential. There are a couple of things that are priority. One is property ownership and management of the property itself, the buildings, the equipment. There's some chickens and eggs here. And we really need, without access to property and some kind of a cooperative group of stakeholders who can have access to property and that can be developed, then the project really can't go further. Also, if we don't maintain some of the buildings that are there, they're going to fall in continued disrepair, as a couple of the buildings already are, where they're on the brink of not being really, not just economically, but viably renovated. In essence, as we looked at this, and the team that looked at it, we're an architectural firm. We had a landscape architect, urban planner, Dale, who will speak to you in just a few minutes, involved in this, as well as Ernst Bleinberger, who is an economic development strategist, as well as structural, mechanical, electrical engineers, looking at these buildings, not so much from the standpoint of how could they be used for the Wyoming State Hospital. Those studies have been done, numerous studies have been done, and we've reviewed all of those, and they were informative. But the difference in that, in our perspective, is that while those were business and office buildings, they were also housing in an institutional setting that for the state hospital's purposes didn't necessarily serve their purposes functionally or economically. But as repurposed buildings for a number of other uses, they certainly are in a condition readily available, or not readily available, but readily in condition to be developed, as many other buildings that I'm sure you're all aware of have been developed and repurposed and have become continued economic development tools within the communities across the state. So the key thing to remember today, there's a couple of questions that the steering committee, I think, really needs to know. One, relative to the land, the buildings, the equipment, the disposition of those, how can that work with the state in moving forward in the community, in allowing that property to be developed? That's one point. The second point, and Mr. Johansson, I think, I don't see your name here, but Mr. Johansson talked about the buildings have been talked about being mothballed and boarding those up. And that's a discussion that we've not had with the state concerning what their plan is for boarding up those buildings, what that work looks like. Is it building and protecting and mothballing them, or just turning off the heat, or just not sending maintenance crews through? What does that really look like? So that's something that needs to be defined in order to make sure that we're preserving the integrity of those buildings for the long term. So let me just go to, so that we're all on the same page, with a little bit of information.
So, Jerry, do you want, if members of the committee have a question, would you like us to ask those as we go along, or would you kind of like to get through your presentation? We're flexible there.
Well, what I was going to do, I'm not going to take you through, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm not intending to take you through the weeds of this report. I want to highlight a few points that are I think important that they're fully understood. That may be more than what you might have gleaned in a quick walk through this report on your own. But no, absolutely. Any questions you have, just interrupt me. That's fine. Would like to answer them.
So I guess the question that you posed, kind of back to Director Johansson, was what is the state, what is the agency and the state's intention to do with those buildings? And I think he answered that at the beginning. And would you like him to again help you to clarify that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you're speaking with me, right?
Yep.
Yes. If he could just explain a little bit, as the steering committee's been looking at what would need to be involved. We can get volunteers to mow grass, we can go up with boards. What do we need to do to preserve these buildings? And very simply, from our perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We need to protect the buildings from vandalism. So there would be some windows that would need to be protected and boarded up. There's a couple of areas where downspouts and rain gutters are allowing water to penetrate the building. And the biggest issue is steam from the steam generation that's creating a very high humidity and a condensation issue in these buildings that's just kind of destroying them from the inside out. And so my question would be, with that in mind, what was the state? Do you have a plan then to, in mothballing, to take care of those issues?
Director Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a good question. So to put it at a high level, what we would be looking to do after the end of the year is turning off the utilities, so all the heat, the water, also the fire alarms, and to your point, we would be boarding up all of those lower floor windows. We would empty those buildings of all of the fixed assets that the state owns or that the state would be using or repurposing. And the steam heat, to your question, would be turned off. And the plan from the facilities perspective, in conjunction with construction management, was to sell off the boilers, because those could be reused. So that is the current vision and the current plan. But I would be happy to connect you or this group with our construction management and major maintenance folks, as well as the facility maintenance folks, for more detail.
Okay, Jerry, proceed, please.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, and thank you, Mr. Johansson. That would be great. I'd like that contact. If you could forward that to Rocco, he could get that to us as well. That would be great information. So looking at the land, and this comes to the disposition of land, as we've talked about this, and none of what I'm going to tell you is set in stone or has been given to us as this is the way this is going to happen. Our intent here is to give you more information and better yet, to come away with your insight as to how the steering committee should move forward. And we as a team should move forward in pursuing more information or development of a plan, an initial strategic plan, as well as a long-term plan for this site. So just so we're in context, the property that you see here, the state owns all the way down to this corner. This is the new facility right here. Across the highway, there's 105 acres that the state has. This is the city's water treatment plant. There's an elementary school to the south. And across the interstate is 13 acres that is a small cemetery over on the other side. For the intent of this study, we've looked at the property basically in this centerpiece to the north end of the state property there proper. And looking at this, there are 117 acres in the total. When we look at the buildings, the buildings that are being vacated are all of the buildings in this green or this small yellow area. These are buildings that are maintenance buildings. There's a laundry building right here. Those buildings would be continue to be used by the state hospital. So if this property were going to be divided or segregated, those would be the areas we were looking at. So this would be the campus itself proper, which would be 95 acres, if it included this little piece with the entrance, would be the green area. The 35 acres is what we looked at from just a pure development standpoint of what would be the street frontage property that might be available for sale. And that would be this gold section here. Then, and going back to that, with looking at this as if an entity, whether it's a city or whoever, or combined entity of city and state, were to take this, to basically the land's available for $1, we're going to develop it somehow, we're going to sell some of that off. If the city or a developer took the building, one of the questions that we had, and Mr. Johansson led to that, was what about the equipment, furnishings? There's some, not just the boiler, but some generators and other equipment that are usable, would be sellable. Would those be able to be assets in any way towards the development of this property for whoever that developing entity might be? And so there's the physical properties, buildings, and equipment. Then there was also this land strip. This the way that was discussed. And so in looking at this and discussing this further with the steering committee, it was pointed out that depending on what, looking overall of all of the state property here, what might this look like in the future? And so would it be worth considering the state hospital property being this blue area that would stay for the hospital, with this land to the north, the existing campus, being developed as one whole or as two? The yellow area are the pre-1950s buildings, so they're the historic campus. The buildings in the surrounding area in the kind of the orange color are the 1950s plus. The most of those buildings are 1973 vintage buildings. So there's enough property there and buildings that could almost be its own little life sciences campus or its own educational campus as well. Could be other, but if it was important to preserve the integrity of the historic campus, that would be the yellow area. The building to the south would be second to that. In that discussion, there were two other things that came up. One is that the city has their water treatment plant here on this property. There's about 77 acres plus or minus that also includes the superintendent's house, that the city would be interested in this as well. It could become city property. The green area is property that is large enough to accommodate play fields, soccer fields, that potentially could be beneficial to the school district as well. So when we look at the overall property and best uses of it, that's where we've come to at this point with the property. Any questions on that, Mr. Chair?
Good, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dockstader.
Could we have our architect point out the two buildings with the most potential? As I was reading in his previous script that he gave us, there were two that had more potential than the others.
Jerry, can you point that out there? I think it's buildings maybe 9 and 12 and 14, or is it 7, 8, and 9, and 14 is the one we're currently in, isn't it?
Yes, Chairman Larson, I'm not sure. There's two buildings that are most threatened. And this is the existing campus. They're the Fremont building and then the Clark Hall building. And those two buildings have significant mold. They were vacated some time ago and have seen extensive deterioration over the last year or two. The other buildings, the other blue buildings, are all of the buildings that are on the National Register. The yellow buildings are the newer buildings. Looking at these buildings, the way they were ranked based on both function, current condition of the building, and so forth. This shows you the buildings that were the darkest colors are the ones that are in the best condition overall. It would be the easiest to go into, with the exception of Karn. Karn building is a great building, but it's because of its higher detention capabilities, it's a little more difficult to renovate. So Clark and Fremont are in the worst condition. The rest of them are Mid-ranked are the other buildings here, which would be the administration building that they're still in, Sheridan, and some of those. So to give you an idea of the campus while we're looking at the property, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, so kind of remember this as we go back, if you would. These are the residential buildings. Some of them have quite a bit, mice, quite a bit of deterioration. They're fairly small, and we didn't feel like they would fit very well in the overall commercial development of this campus. So the buildings that are listed in the report as being demolished would be, for instance, these buildings, the small residential buildings. This is Clark Tower, or Clark Hall. It's in probably not the worst condition. This is the Fremont Hall building, and I believe it's probably in worse condition than, although there's more mold in Clark Hall, Fremont is in worse condition. But you can see that the architecture of the buildings themselves are fairly grand. There's still a lot of good, the bones of the building are very good. This is the Carn building, and you can see that, and this is just in the last couple of months. So they're as they left them, and they've still been maintained. There's a lot of good space within these buildings. When we look at restoring historic buildings, typically we're looking at something that's been vacant for 10 years, that the ceilings have caved in, that there's no power, no utilities, but there's a lot of good material in these buildings. You'll see some pictures. This is in Clark Hall. In the lower level of that building, the mold and the deterioration that's occurring there. This is the administration building that's still occupied today. Give you an idea of the tunnels. I don't know how much you've been through all of these buildings. I'm sure you've been on campus. This is the kitchen as well, and the dining hall there with all of the equipment. That, when we talk about the buildings being available for redevelopment, that's, the land is one thing, the building itself is another, and then all of this equipment is yet another. But in reality, I don't know that all of this equipment will serve very well. Some of it's newer, and it's all functional, but it doesn't necessarily just fit into a new dining hall and a new space for the hospital. This shows some of the deterioration. This is Fremont Hall in the lower level. All the dark color you can see is molding from the humidity within the building. This just gives you an idea of the context of the architecture in the buildings, the historic buildings, and the pre-1950s and then the post-1950s buildings. So looking at that with the buildings, are there any questions, Chairman Larson, on or?
Yeah, if I may, Jerry, Chairman Dockstetter, did that answer your question? Give you an idea of what they were looking at?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
So Jerry, let's come back to the conversation where we left off to that, looking at the surrounding lands. And let me just provide a little insight. Throughout the state, and particularly where we have some institutions like the State Hospital and Life Resource Center, there are state lands that were dedicated to those facilities and belong to that facility. So in the process, let's take the 77 acres or 105 acres across the highway there. That belongs to the state hospital. Revenue generated off of that goes to the state hospital, belongs to the state. Can the state dispose of that? They could, but it would require some legislation to do it. So in all of this process would probably require some legislation, but the vacant land or the undeveloped land I think you're going to never say never. We disposed of some land that belonged to the Honor Farm in Riverton back to the city of Riverton a few years ago. So, but you might just consider that that's the process that goes through. And then within the campus, you would be able to, in that green area, I don't think that the green area had, if the community didn't want all of that, kind of back to Senator Dockstetter's point, perhaps, is identify the buildings that you think would be appropriate, and the property could go with that. But and there again, that would require some legislative process to get that land moved over, but I don't think that would be as difficult as perhaps the undeveloped land. Senator Dockstetter, am I saying anything there that is out of whack?
No, that's correct. Mr. Chairman, as you go through this, could we reach out a little bit, and we need to have more of the detail, but reach out to that panel that was sitting there with Senator Schuler and Senator Baldwin. What do we ultimately see here as we get done? To get done what you want to do? What's it going to take us legislatively, financially? What are we going to do? Obviously, you have a vision for this and for the community of Evanston. What's the end product?
Rocco, we're going to throw that back on your table.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, I think Senator Schuler wants to speak on that.
Very good.
I don't know the formal processes. My apologies.
You're doing good. So, Senator Schuler.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the process that Myers Anderson has gone through with the steering committee and with those of us that are on that, it's given us a lot of ideas. I'm kind of an idea person. I think some of their ideas are fantastic, but I do know that money, it always follows those ideas. Actually, it should probably be before the ideas, actually. But so my idea was, eventually looking at some of these things, I don't know that we could do everything that's in the study but I really like a good share of these ideas. Honestly, one of the things that we are hurting for in our community and also out in Bridger Valley is senior housing. And I hear that all the time because I deliver meals one day a week to the seniors around town. And there's some of them that are going to have to leave their houses someday. And there's really no place for a lot of them to go right now. And so I kind of looked at this from my own personal view that wouldn't it be great if we could do some senior housing up there and obtain some money. And I do think there are some potential areas where we could actually leverage some money for that. But I also like the research and development ideas that Myers Anderson came up with. And, we're so close to Salt Lake City and, they're kind of growing out of their area there. So they're scattered out in West Valley and other places. And wouldn't it be great to have something here in our community that would bring in some jobs, would keep our young people here, provide some, economic diversification. So those two ideas really piqued my interest. At one time, I really was gung-ho on a tech college, something more, even maybe a little different from even our community college satellite, something where, a plumber or electrician or a carpenter or whatever could come in here and get a certificate, get back on the job, and away we go. And we've got buildings right here. It comes down to money. And where can we get the money? Where can we leverage these funds that are out there? Some of them are federal, some of them are state. We have, like I said, a great grant writer over here and Rocco that seem to be able to find ways to get money. And I truly think that they are pretty good at what they do. And so that would be my vision. But I know without money, the state, we don't have a lot of money, even though we're getting some from the feds. It's one-time money, and we know that. and we'll be able to prop up some things. But projects like this, we're probably going to have to be a little more creative and think out of the box a little bit more. So yeah, I would love to see us be able to leverage some money and try to do something with parts of the campus that might be able to be rehabbed or reused, knowing of course that there's a lot of the campus that may not fall into that category of being able to be reused and rehabbed. And so, yeah, even though I'm kind of a creative thinker and I see these plans and my mind is going 100 miles an hour, I know that we have to have the money, and that's what we got to go after. But having this study, I think it really helps us. It gives us a plan forward that we can kind of start looking at what we can do and where we can go to find that. So that's my thought. Go ahead, Senator Baldwin.
You know, and you, Senator Baldwin, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Baldwin.
Yeah, a light bulb came on in my head, and it's a dim one at that. But another one of the task force, I sit on the governor's health task force. When Senator Schuler talked about senior housing, those are the kind of things that we're looking at on that task force. And we're applying and asking for some of the ARPA money. That's one thought. If we have some health related things, it would help. Heaven knows that we need help in the health related fields down here in Evanston, Uinta County, Bridger Valley. That's something we may want to consider and perhaps refer to Jen Davis on that health task force. That's a potential for some of that money for one of our considerations. That's other than that, I would just second everything that Senator Schuler said. You know, the city of Evanston has done a remarkable job with all of these historic things that have been handed to them in the past, including the building that we're sitting in right now, and including the buildings that immediately surround us. They've done a fabulous job of preserving all these things. And I think that's significant interest of the city of Evanston. Let's keep it historic. Let's keep the things that are here and not let things die away, if you will. And I think this is just another thing that we see. You know, I look downtown at the theater where we had a fire. There's just a number of things go on in the city of Evanston. It sure would be nice if we could get those number of things to go on in all the communities in my district. They don't, but I think Evanston has a very strong history, and this is just another step in that direction.
Thank you. Chairman Dockstader.
Chairman, I hope I'm not jumping forward too fast, but a couple of things here. There may be some accessible money if we're talking senior citizens that we need to put together rather quickly in preparation for the session. Long term, if you look at some of those other things, they may not be out of the question, but we need a little longer to put that together. Senator Schuler hit on something. You're an hour away from 2.5 million people that are climbing all over top of themselves, and they got an international airport. And think about the great life they could have in Evanston, Wyoming, and still have access to all that. So what do we got going that we can have long-term, and what can we access almost immediately, perhaps through those federal funds, senior citizen? Is there, to the folks around the table there, have we got a game plan to, like a short-term game plan, a long-term game plan, and put this together? Evanston's already proven that they can do things like with the Roundhouse and with that theater. They already have a pattern of success. Why can't this be successful too? It's just a matter of, we got to get it sorted out, and in one case move rather quickly, in the other get a long-term plan as to which building does what. You folks would know better than that, but we can't bypass this opportunity. Look on that map in front of us. That's a great piece of property you have there.
Well, and if I might add, Jerry, a question come to my mind is having that conversation. At the conclusion of your report, it points out that there's about $50 million required to bring everything back into line in its entirety, if all the stars aligned. What if demolition took place and then we repurpose that property? I understand that there's an intent to preserve the historic buildings, but is the return on investment, from your perspective, how does that come into play there? Did you give that some consideration as you went through that process as well? And that's back to you, Mr. Meyer or Jerry.
Jerry is fine. Thank you, Chairman Larson. We've looked at that a little bit, and I'd like Ernie Weinberger to address that just a little bit. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just have Dale speak to kind of the vision of this in the land and what we've looked at relative to that, because that helps answer that question about the importance of what's the future use of this property and what are the benefits to the community. And that decision has an impact there. And then following Dale, if Mr. Chair, if Ernie could be allowed to speak to the economic viability of this, what we've looked at relative to the types of uses, best use, and also the economic impact of that. And then after Ernie is done, I would just quickly show you the three alternative scenarios for development that we have. Basically, there's a $55 million scenario, $42 million scenario, and I believe it's $27 million scenario based on the number of buildings that are developed. And I would share those with you. And then that would be the end of what I would have as far as presentation.
So you're very kind, and we'll be patient and let you finish. We have a tendency to get a little bit out ahead of ourselves. So please, let's follow, let you guys do the report as you've outlined, and then let's continue the conversation, because we do have a number of questions.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Larson. And I appreciate your comments, because that gives me a lot of hope in some of what I'm hearing, that there's opportunities. So with that, if it's all right, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to Dale Hatch.
Mr. Hatch, please.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. The drawing that you're looking at now is one of the early studies that we did with our steering committee when we were visiting the site a couple of months ago. And Jerry, I'll ask you possibly to follow my conversation with your cursor so the folks can see the areas we're talking about. So this map now is oriented as was the parcel map that Jerry had up there earlier. A couple of things that struck me, because it had been the first time that I actually visited Evanston when I saw this site for the first time, was just how prominent the property was. As I approached it from Salt Lake and the west, you could see some of those historic structures on that plateau. And it's definitely, in my opinion, I agree with Senator Schuler. She mentioned earlier that this property is really, it kind of establishes a gateway as people would enter Evanston from the east. Those pink arrows that you see on that drawing sort of indicate the prominence of the site sitting on the plateau, those upper areas, and how they can be viewed from different parts of the community. The other important thing, I think, is just the community value of the property and some of the historic nature of the site and the structures. One of the goals was, as we looked at what the opportunities might be, would be to how could we recognize the history and the culture of Evanston and the use of the property. So those historic structures on this map depicted in blue are very important from that regard. As opposed to a scenario where, say, the site is completely cleared, everything's demolished, it might be sold off and it becomes some large commercial site, truck stop, something like that. The challenges of the access off of Interstate 80 and the access from that intersection of 150, potentially the grade differences, et cetera, potentially, I think, might cause some issues. At any rate, one of the things that struck me, no matter what the repurposing of this property might be, along State Route 150, to establish some sort of an entry and arrival statement, in my mind, would be important. And to maintain that green apron along that highway, in a sense, to give the property itself some sort of an enhanced curb appeal, I think would be beneficial to whatever the repurposing might be. You can see that we've illustrated the potential in that red zone as sort of a prime area for redevelopment. There's not a lot of structure in that particular red zone. You can see some of the blue buildings in the left-hand edge of it that are questionable in terms of their ability to be reused and repurposed. Jerry touched on one of them. I think it was one of the old dormitory buildings there. Still has some very nice architecture to it, kind of fronts and presents itself to the public along the highway. So possibly that one could be kept, but otherwise that zone is a fairly easy zone to be developed, open. You'll also see as that Boulevard Road comes in that we're looking just there where the cursor is to sort of stop that view as you enter in there. So to have some sort of a screen back there at the lower edge of that yellow cluster of buildings would be important. There's a couple of service buildings in that particular area that we also felt would probably be demolished. And you'll see that the road system illustrated here, we're suggesting that it would benefit any repurposing to have a more simplified road system throughout the site. The sort of purplish rectangles that you see, 3 of them on the site there, up there by the historic area, and then over there to the north. Some sort of orientation and redevelopment of that street or streets and intersections to give a user or a visitor some sort of opportunity to become oriented within the site. It's somewhat chaotic now, in my opinion, as I drove through it as a first-time visitor, to try and find my way through it. So along with those orientation nodes, we feel that a wayfinding program and common signage program throughout a development like this would be very important as well. So we talked a little bit about that red zone. The blue zone is the historic zone. Has some absolutely stunning architecture, period architecture that really gives the character to that portion of the property. I kind of noted it myself as more the formal zone. It has a very distinct common green in front of it that I think adds to the to the feel of historic development. There's some opportunities within that zone that I think could benefit the public from almost a park-like setting as well. The third zone is that brown zone where the yellow buildings are located. They've been separated from a standpoint of the age of the structures and the immediate reuse of the structures. One of the things that has struck me the most, I think, as I visited the site was there's some really nice mature vegetation in that historic zone. And many of those trees are in decline. They need some attention if they're going to be saved. Pruning, good pruning, but the entire site is almost like its own little drought zone. And I think whether the irrigation has been turned off or neglected, or it's in some sort of antiquated state, it's very, very dry. Any of the landscape that exists there today, I think, is stressed and is struggling. So one of the things that we were told was that Lake Louise, when it was filled, used to be used as draw for irrigation. And we saw that as, in future, a potential to reestablish that, to essentially bring back the landscape so it could flourish and enhance whatever development might occur. If we're talking about Lake Louise, it's a unique, very unique feature for a site like this, no matter what the use, to have that type of an asset, not only for the irrigation, but an asset for recreation. So we see that very northern area of a enhanced Lake Louise as a recreational element and venue, not only for this campus redevelopment, but also for the community. A gathering, performance, or outdoor educational setting on that eastern edge of the lake. Other trail system, formal trail system around it. There is a trail on the dike itself today. And then even opportunities beyond that, potentially for some community fields for outdoor field recreation, things like that. that's basically our first look. Right where Jerry's cursor is, you'll see those buildings outlined with just a blue line lower right. Those were the structures that Jerry mentioned earlier that would be maintained in support of your new state hospital facility. And lastly, in looking at providing an identity for a repurposed campus, where we talked about that entry and arrival. Right now, that point serves not only this historic edge of the campus, but also serves the new state hospital. And with a replanning, repurposing, one of the things we suggested was a strong consideration to give this new state hospital its own entry and arrival point off of 150, a little bit further to the east. So that's very general. I know that that's kind of a high flyover of our first thoughts. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, any questions? So, I didn't see any hand. I guess, Mr. Hatch, the one question I had was on that last, on the entranceway. So right now, the state hospital has an entranceway, but you would take it away for this development, not provide the new one. It's how you word that, which I thought was very, very clever, because it already has an entranceway, but you would take that away and require them to put a new one in further down there to the east where Jerry's, I guess that's my cursor on your, yeah. So, and then the other question I had as we look about the return on investment is always kind of a thing for me on this sort of stuff. And so when you get down to Lake Louise and you talk about the recreational opportunities, those are generally revenue consuming son of a guns. They don't, they're beautiful and they're wonderful. Am I seeing that wrong?
There's no question that any kind of enhancement to an element like Lake Louise would have new and even continued maintenance costs. Yeah. That's true. But again, in the work that I do in land planning and landscape architecture, a piece of ground that has an asset like that is it's very valuable to whatever type of development might go in there.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Good point, I might add.
Chairman Larson?
Please.
Just to add to what he had said, looking at this other plan, you can see the roadway. Maybe this other map is a little bit better. This will work, but you can see the roadway here. It comes up, and then you go to the left to the historic campus. You come up, and then you find your way all the way down here to the new hospital. And so, in looking at this with development of potentially, if there was school district, if there was city land, if this was enhanced the way that other sketch showed it, with a boulevard that came into this rec area, to this development, to the historic campus, and that was primary to that. And then the entrance were down here, farther south on the highway, that would be a new, more prominent entrance that would give identity to the state hospital. That would be much more direct and I think more effective than bringing the public in past your maintenance buildings, your maintenance of your boneyard, and then back down into your brand new facility. It would be better to bring them in the front door than through the back door, I would think.
Thank you. Good point. Director Johansson, I see your hand up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that previous bird's eye view of the different parcels for development, I'm having trouble seeing, but Chairman Larson, you might notice it looks like on parcel 2, the old laundry building would be part of that, and we have remodeled that. So that is currently in use. Just wanted to point that out. And then secondly, if I may, maybe I'm jumping ahead now, so I'll just put this question out there for consideration as the conversation develops. I think from the Department of Health and the state hospital's perspective, to get to what President Dockstetter was asking in terms of details, I think within this plan, in the short term, what would be helpful for our decision making is what the specific ask is if there is one, for how you would propose the Department of Health, the state hospital, maintain some of the old buildings like the admin building, the others that we've been discussing today, given that our plan for the past couple of years has been to, as I mentioned, board those up and really turn the utilities off and stop the general maintenance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Jerry, do you want to approach that now, or should we continue on with our discussion and come back and maybe kind of bundle some of that stuff up, because I don't know that will be the end of that conversation.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. Yes, just real simply, I would say yes. We certainly would love to assist in helping to determine what that mothballing looks like and what that means, and what the most economical, but also the most effective means are. Looking at the time frame that we would be doing that. And also we acknowledge that the laundry building is it's right here, and it would stay with the state hospital. So with that, I would like to give, sorry, Mr. Chair, Ernie Bleinberger an opportunity to talk about what is another important part of this is who would use this and what's the viability of it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Breinberger.
You're muted, Ernie.
How about now?
That sounds great, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, obviously, and not the least of which is within the sort of development economics realm. And a lot of times when I, try to explain this or walk, through the process, I have a tendency to start at the very beginning and then kind of go through the whole methodology and then get to the ending. For today's purposes, I'm thinking that it might be a good idea for us to just convey some of our findings and recommendations as they sit today, and then we can go back and talk, more in terms of how those decisions or those recommendations were arrived at. But all of what we're talking about here, not to lose sight of the goal and objective of redeveloping this property and this campus for so many good reasons. And our essential recommendation in terms of implementation on this would be to seek and obtain a private sector development partner that takes the whole thing for its own business purposes, but within the framework of a very robust, rigorous and binding development and operating agreement with that partner that ensures that the goals and objectives of the state, city, and the community, are wrapped into the decisions that the private sector partner will make over a period of time. And that would be in return partly for a commitment to invest X millions of dollars, at signing, so to speak, to cement their, skin in the game and so forth, but then to commit to additional funds over a period of time that would meet eventually the threshold of we'll call it the $50 million that's going to be required to fully bring this campus back online. That solves a lot of problems. Going piecemeal over time with, building by building, parcel by parcel and so forth, is going to be very, very difficult row to hoe in our opinion. Now, as to that private sector partner, question is, well, who or what would that be? And in the course of our market analysis, we kind of came to be focused on the life sciences industry, which isn't just one business or one company, as you all are aware, and it's summarized in the report that you've been given. But this is a global industry that is growing by leaps and bounds. They're probably the highest performing industry, financially on the stock market and equity investments and just about any kind of benchmark you would want to apply. So in addition, there's a lot of other advantages that the life sciences industry kind of writ large might have for this project. So is it the only end user, if you will? And bearing in mind that if a life sciences company, which we could also use the phrase, health and wellness or, some other kind of identifier, but, there's no reason why a suitable and qualified partner can't, well, for one thing, restore the buildings that warrant restoration, invest money in the improvements to the lake for community use and things like that. In some of our earlier planning workshops and things like that, we talked, Dell had talked about, possibility of the lake being sort of an entertainment venue, possibly. I think in this one graphic that Jerry's got up there, we show sort of a kind of an amphitheater that's oriented to the water. And the public sector over time, gets its return on investment through the capital investment that the private sector would bring to the table, get the campus redeveloped, but then net new property taxes, sales taxes, job creation, small business development spinoffs, and people living, working, shopping, and playing and so forth, in the community. I think it would be, a real asset that once again, not the only game in town necessarily, but I think the life sciences industry, is a real healthy candidate for that role. Any questions or?
So I do kind of have a question that plagued me, Ernie, on that conversation with life sciences. I appreciate that, but as I read that, has there been any interest from a life science? I mean, how you come to that conclusion? How, other than they are the most, they're growing well, they're they're very active globally. Mm-hmm. But what evidence is there to you that they would be interested in this? We could coming to Evanston and participating in such an endeavor. Can you help me understand? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's certainly not a slam dunk, as the saying goes, but I've been, over the last several years, I've been working with the life sciences industry on another project, an airport in Virginia, that's interested in developing some of its landside property, not dissimilar from the situation that you've got here, but thinking about an industry that is mobile, essentially, is not bound to locate necessarily in any one particular location because, they need, a harbor or, some other kind of criteria that would dictate that they be in a specific location. So it really kind of opens up the window of opportunity for these companies that are located all over the world. And there are several in Wyoming that we listed in the report. The University of Wyoming it's not a degree program, but it does have a life sciences a specialty area, I guess you would call it. And with connections to the tech college and things like that in life sciences. And, there are applications in agriculture, pharmaceuticals. It's obviously a pretty broad, a broad sector, but the campus itself, reads very much to us like a research campus. And so research and development campus, you've got the, kind of a neat layout there where that would be could be a nice place to go to work. It could be well suited to having different types of functions in different buildings. There's possibly enough land available if they wanted to build new constructed, pilot production areas and things like that. There are just a lot of, positives, I guess, we're checking the positive column about that industry that, you could test fairly easily, early in the game to see if there's interest. But we also looked at other scenarios like the state remaining involved, kind of doing things more piecemeal or getting in nonprofits, tech colleges and things like that. We looked at that. We looked at senior housing, by the way, is one area of the economy or of our society in which there is significant unsatisfied demand. And we've spoken with the Evanston Housing Authority, and they would like to do some additional units as well. And that is something that could possibly be, we're not talking huge numbers of units, but it could be something that is integrated into the overall ultimate, development program that the private sector partner works to create, with the public sector partner as they move forward. We looked at a standalone commercial leasing scenario where say, well, okay, if we take this building, it's 200,000 square feet, and we lease space to doctors and dentists and lawyers and architects and economists and things like that, how does that look? Now that project as a standalone actually on paper makes money, but it doesn't have the economic horsepower to pay for all the redevelopment costs. Plus, we have some questions about really the market depth for demand for just spec office space in Evanston. So once again, having a dedicated, owner operator, if you will, of the property has a lot of appeal, I think, in our opinion.
You had mentioned in the beginning of your discussion that, the intent was to bring a seek and obtain a private developer. But then it sounded to me like you said that would be a private developer in my mind would come in with the funding to do that. But I kind of took from what you were saying that they would come in and develop it, but the funding source would have to be from someplace else.
No.
Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, sure. No, and if I wasn't clear on that, to be clear, I mean, we would envision a scenario where it's, the whole thing is done with 95 to 96 to 98% private, fully private funding, private capital. Now, if the state or philanthropic organization or the city or some other, federal government or something like that, comes to the table with some monies, they can certainly be well applied, and that would kind of potentially sweeten the deal, for the development agreement. But I think that's another reason, to kind of go private, if you will, is that there is the potential for a private sector firm company to have that financial wherewithal to invest its money into this project. So we'll call it 95% private, 5% public.
Thank you. That clarified it. Committee, any other questions? Do I have one there at the table? I see a hand up. I don't know if that's you, Mr. O'Neill, or.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just, if Ernie was done and.
We've got, Rocco, before you, we've got somebody else there, maybe with their mic on. We're getting some feedback.
Mr. Chairman, is that better?
No.
Mr. Chairman, is that better?
It's not, but maybe we ought to try anyway.
I'm not sure what we got going on here. I guess to answer some of the questions from the committee about next steps forward and maybe a proposed path forward. Taking on this project at the city and county level, it was stressed to me and Mika and Senator Schuler and those of us on our steering committee that the city and local government did not want to participate in this from an ownership standpoint. We have a beautiful roundhouse and rail yards facility down here that has turned into one of the nicest properties in the state of Wyoming. But that's taken 20 years and probably $1 million each year to get that done. And that's taken about every ounce of development that we have here in Evanston towards that property. This is just a huge undertaking for a community. Our goal here was to, instead of become the Facebook commenters of the world and yell at you what you're supposed to be doing with the property and telling you guys need to do this and that, was to provide some help, some actual material of substance that we could bring to you and offer our assistance in. And I guess to get back to all of this information that we presented to you in this document, my argument would be that whether it's life sciences or a research and development campus in partnership with the university, we have a state-owned piece of property that has facilities that are in good shape. Some of them are in not so good shape, but most of them are in pretty good shape. We have a state economic development agency with dozens of employees, and we have an opportunity to create an economic driver in our community. So what I kind of envision, and I'd like to have kind of an informal discussion with you folks at some point about this, I would like to see this task force, this committee, ask for the assistance of the Wyoming Business Council in recruiting a life sciences user for this campus, or getting with the University of Wyoming and having an honest discussion about how they could participate in a research and development or innovation center of some kind on the campus. And I know that can induce some eye rolling because that's kind of big dreams. But I think our Wyoming Business Council does great things, and everyone likes to play economic developer every once in a while. I think that this could be an awesome project for this committee to take on, and with help from the city and county to recruit a life sciences user. And I guess before I get off of here, the Wyoming Energy Authority submitted a proposal for the Build Back Better EDA funding. And I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with that, but there's roughly $3 billion up for grabs. And I don't know if the value of the dollar will hold with all this money we're throwing away, but there's 40 regions that will receive up to $100 million in EDA funding for transformative economic development projects. And we listed the Wyoming State Hospital Historic Campus as our component project on that application. That's how strongly we believe that this campus could be turned into an economic driver. Now, whether we get that money, I'm not sure. And obviously the city and county doesn't own that property, and neither does the Energy Authority. But let's say hypothetically, the state of Wyoming, the Wyoming Energy Authority gets $75 million, and we can use 10 million of that to rehab and repurpose a couple of those buildings into spec research and development R&D spaces that we can use to recruit a life sciences user, or that we can use as space for University of Wyoming outreach research and development campus. Obviously, that's a long ways down the line. But I guess at this point, we'd like to work collaboratively with you folks on how to put some of this great information that Strategy 5 and Myers Anderson Architects put together to use in a pragmatic way. Like Senator Schuler, I'm a dreamer. I always think that the highest and best use ought to be the only option. And, we're here to help, and we want to get after it. We've got 2 new major employers coming to town. We've recruited manufacturers. A lot of people rolled our eyes when we built the Union Center Business Park, and things are starting to come to fruition in Little Evanston. We're on the cusp of real economic growth in Evanston. The Wasatch Front is pushing towards us. We have a good path forward as far as our economic development strategy. We have companies moving here, and we have 600,000 square feet of building and 95 acres of property that can assist us in that effort. So I'm sorry to drag on and keep going, but I guess I'll give it back to you, Mr. Chairman Larson.
Thank you. Director Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And probably this question is for Mr. O'Neill as well. And forgive me for beating the dead horse and being blunt again. In terms of this plan, Mr. O'Neill, for my own operational decision-making here, does what we are planning to do to the old buildings on the campus after December 30th in terms of the lack of maintenance, the boarding up, does that interfere with where this group is suggesting that the state go? So again, is there a specific proposal here for us to do something different with the maintenance of these buildings? Because I understand there's some long-term visioning going on here, attracting investors, attracting different industries potentially to be interested in a development plan like this. But little more than 2 months from now is when we're really starting to cease a lot of the maintenance on those buildings. So I want to make sure that we're aligning, priorities here. And if that's really standing in the way, then we probably need to have a subsequent conversation with this committee.
Mr. O'Neill, would you like to kind of respond to that maybe, or if not, that's okay as well?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Johansson, I will defer to Jerry Myers. I know he has a kind of a critical decisions narrative and a next steps that we want to discuss with you folks. So I will, Mr. Chairman, defer to Jerry.
Jerry, next steps.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Very simply, what you're talking about, Mr. Johansson, is in line with what the steering committee had talked about. The buildings need to be protected through the next winter. I think that the only area that we really would want to look at that you didn't mention was the ventilation of the buildings, making sure that we have airflow and ventilation through to keep the humidity out and to help dry them out. Because at this point, there's been enough condensation in some of those buildings that if we just close them up, they're going to continue to disintegrate. But if we secure them but allow some ventilation to let the humidity out, then they'll preserve much better. And so I think it's just a matter of some simple coordination between what is planned and making sure that it's more than just securing the buildings, but it's also protecting the integrity of them, which is a little more than what you were talking about, I think, perhaps. So a suggestion would be that your folks, your construction management group, get together with the city of Evanston, with representation, our mechanical engineer in particular, and just at least have a conversation and discussion about what's the end result there as far as the actual physical work to be done, and are we doing things the best way possible for the buildings.
So Director Johansson, do you have a follow-up question? Or is did you just have your yellow hand up?
No, I just had my hand up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How about you, Mr. O'Neill? Is that you still got your hand up, or would you like to ask a question? Or Very good. So I guess kind of a question that I'm going to send back to Mr. Shaw, who's our LSO staff attorney. If Ian, if you could join us maybe for a minute. Because I think procedurally we kind of have to figure out how to move some of this conversation forward. And Ian, are you with us?
Mr. Chairman, I am, yes.
So, Ian, my question is what, when this task force was created, what are our limitations? And what we were hearing from this group is requesting or suggesting that perhaps we could move forward. This task force could move some recommendations forward on what to do with the buildings or how to proceed with the buildings. And I just want to, before we commit or to anything, I just want to make sure that we're not stepping outside the authority we've been given with this task force. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that to give us some direction?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I do. I hope I'm not frozen on your screen, or I hope you can hear me because I just froze on my own screen. But Mr. Chairman, I think it would always be appropriate for the committee can make recommendations, particularly in its annual report back to the Joint Appropriations Committee and the legislature. We make recommendations likely on anything particularly relevant to the property. Whether we would have a bill sponsoring authority, should you try to decide it's appropriate to make appropriations or other things, I would have to look back at the language, but I think that might be somewhat more challenging. But certainly, I think in our report, we would be free to make whatever recommendations we want.
Very good. That helps immensely. Thank you. So then if, well, let me ask this question, Jerry, to you first. Maybe we're not done with the presentations. I'm just trying to get some thoughts in order here. Is there some additional information that you'd like to, from this report, that you'd like to provide?
Yes, just in summary on part of that. Let me just, thank you, Mr. Chair, review with you the three scenarios so that you have a context. When we start talking about costs, and as they're discussed, they'll talk about how much I can build new buildings for I can build a brand new building for $52 million. Those are all true, but in keeping those in context, we did three scenarios. One is the bigger plan, and that's to develop 14 buildings, which would be all of the buildings that are in the orange color there. And that's the roughly $55 million estimated for that. And that includes the site, utilities, and the rest of that as well. And so that basically, looking at that, is about $133 a square foot for the buildings themselves. So when you look at the cost, let me blow that up a little bit so you can see that. And it's in the, oops, I'm sorry. So the building itself is in total are 37 million, just under 40 million. So that's $133 a square foot for construction. That equates to $175 a square foot completed project with the $55 million. So even at that, that's because of the volume of the scale of the buildings with that number of buildings. That comes out at, as I said, $175 a square foot. The three scenarios go from $175 a square foot to $237 a square foot. To build a building that's a life sciences building or a technology building is going to be in the $350 to $450 a square foot. So keeping that in context, it's more energy efficient, it's more economical to repurpose these buildings than it is to tear them down and build brand new. We're looking at just under $4 million to demolish all those buildings, is what our estimate is for current demolition. So that money would be
Jerry, so
yes.
Your $4 million, you're saying $4 million to demolish all of the buildings that you've identified, just the ones that you've identified to be demolished?
No, that would be the entire campus, Mr. Chair. So if,
Well, not every building, just the buildings that you've identified to be demolished.
no, the $4 million would be all of these, if you were going to level the site completely.
And you base that on, how did you come up with that number?
That's based on a little more than $10 a square foot for the demolition costs. And that's about $1 million more than what I understood the initial cost was. I think it was roughly $3 million that initially had been budgeted for that. Am I correct in that?
It was, but we've concluded that that was woefully insufficient. That's why I was trying to figure out, I'd be interested to see how you come up with those numbers. We were just in what we had at the Life Resource Center on some buildings that we had to demolish that would be pale in comparison to this. We exceeded that significantly. And so I'm just interested in and I'm not saying I'm not saying you're wrong. I just, man, if you can do it for 4 million, that's that's good. I just was curious on what you based that on. If you just based it on what we had come up with, that helped me understand, but because we fell short there. So and then if I may also just go to Director Johansson's, because you refer here about $175 a square foot. And Director Johansson, can you remember, aren't we up around that 300 something mark a square foot on new construction there in Inlander?
Mr. Chairman, that I think that's roughly accurate with my memory, but I'd have to double check on the specifics, but I think it is much higher.
So Jerry, if we were looking, let's just say just the even $300 a square foot, what does that change your projection to? Do you have a feel?
Mr. Chair, if that $300 a square foot for which square footage, for the total?
Well, the way I understood you is you thought that maybe you could get some of this renovation or restoration work done by about $175 a square foot. Was that correct, or did I misunderstand you?
That's an average. That's using, for instance, for the Fremont building, that's using $250 a square foot. But
do you think that just seems really shy to me?
Well, for a renovation of it, Mr. Chair, a renovation of the building that's in the condition that those are in, there are numerous buildings. The costs that we've used here are costs from actual building construction projects that are just finishing or that are just bidding. And certainly the renovation cost, you have the shell, the frame, the structure, you have the electrical service. Some of those things need to be upgraded a little bit. But when you take a building such as Teton Hall, which is occupied, those are figured at $125 a square foot, which is about 25% more than what we were seeing on other buildings, very similar as far as renovation.
Well, and you guys are the experts. I just saying. And did that include mitigation for any hazardous materials? Did that come into play on these?
It did.
Okay.
We have those reports.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think with that, Chairman Larson, open for questions.
Any other questions, Senator Schuler or Senator, you got a question there? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a quick kind of follow up to the conversation. I think the bottom line is we want to be able to work with the state to do whatever it is we can do with this property. And I think with this study, we kind of have an idea, at least we have a bit of a plan. But regardless of what ends up happening, whether we can come up with some private sector funding or venture capital funding or anything like that, I think the state, it behooves us to at least be proactive in making sure that we do have some funds set aside, because we do know that some of these buildings will be demolished, will have to be demolished, I think. I don't think anybody wants to see them just mothballed until they fall apart. And so I think that's something that I know a couple of you folks, I think, are on the Joint Appropriations Committee that could maybe, along with some of the rest of us, get that on the radar. But I think the ask from Director Johansson that, what is our specific ask? I think our ask is exactly this, is maybe we need a little more time to continue to work for forward with this plan. And I think the Myers and Anderson have done a great job with really an unbiased view. I mean, the rest of us here are pretty biased to see them all saved, and we know they can't be. But I think their study basically shows us what we can do and maybe what we could do in the future with the proper funds. And so I appreciate the fact that Mika and Rocco and City of Evanston has really been unbelievably creative, and they really have been kind of futuristic in looking at what we can do with these old buildings, instead of just saying, the state owns and we don't care, which would be very easy to do. And even though we'd love to see what we have down here at the rail yards, some rehab, we know that these buildings really have never made money for the City of Evanston. We don't get a lot of return of investment if you're talking just money, but how important they are to our city, you can't put a price on that. The number of weddings and events that we have down here and activities. We have prom down here. We have so many things. And so had we not done something years ago, the city, they would have probably, some of them, fallen down by now. We just don't want to see that happen with our historic campus. And so I guess my ask really for the Department of Health and for our committee is maybe give us a bit more time, give Myers and Anderson a bit more time to see if we can't, focus in on what we actually can do, maybe be a little bit more realistic, but also see if we can't go out and get the Wyoming Business Council to partner with us a little bit. I know we have a representative here that'll probably kind of get that on the radar for us, and see if they can't help us with, possibly getting some money to see what we can do, and possibly with the ARP funds and getting this on the possibly the radar of the strike force with the governor as well, so that we can, we can't just walk away and say, well, we tried and it didn't happen. I think we need to have that ask that we maintain some of those buildings that need to be maintained. We know that some of them have already they've deteriorated, some that we can't save. And I'm with you, Director Johansson. I think some of those may just have to be boarded up and done away with, and that's okay, because you saw some of the pictures and some of them just can't bring them back. So that would be my ask, and I don't know if Senator Baldwin might have, and Representative Worse here too, so you may have some other ideas.
He's dressed even more casual than me.
Got his hunting attire up.
No, and I guess I would add on to Senator Schuler, Senator Baldwin, and that is that we perhaps take this to the appropriations, and as much as I hate to see a continuation of the task force, take it to the Appropriations Committee and say, give them a presentation, show them what's there, see if they have any, motivation to perhaps move towards this, appropriate money, or perhaps extend the task force, whatever they had in mind. But I think that's an ask to take to the Appropriations and ask Appropriations Committee if they have any indication that they would like to continue this or see this move forward, or at the very least give us some more time to give the group here some time to put together some more plans and perhaps come up with something a little more solid.
So if I may, Senator Baldwin and Senator Schuler, because in Senator Schuler, I just might also mention that I attended a wonderful wedding reception in the Roundhouse. There's some rogue Larson kid that stole away a fair maiden from Evanston, and we had that reception there, and it is a wonderful facility. But I think that there's some specifics, and I think maybe this is kind of what Director Johansson has alluded to. I think that there's some specific questions that I would throw out here for this committee, and I ask for your input to see as we move forward. So if we're to make a recommendation, we need to do that in the annual report that I basically got completed, and I can amend it to add the recommendation in. But more specifically, we got 60 days, and then that facility is going to be shut down. And so we need to be making some decisions in the next 60 days with the powers that be on what we're going to do to continue the stabilization or the maintenance of those buildings while in the mothball mode, so that we don't accelerate the degradation of the building. And I think so we need to, that's probably the most important decision that we have coming up, because I think that's what you're asking for in more time, because you have all the time in the world. It's just that you need more time, and we want to make sure that the buildings don't degrade while you have this additional time. And so I think what I would is, and Director Johansson, if you could add to this, but I would just ask if anybody's seen anything additional there that we need to add to that, and then we could make the recommendation in the report that goes to Labor and Health Committee and the Appropriations Committee on recommendations for how we fund that. We could maybe move that funding out away from the Department of Health's budget, move it to Department of A&I, or figure something. But that's some discussion we can have between committee members on how we would recommend doing that and bringing that forward. So, Director Johansson, any thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would add, if I may, that given that we are, as you mentioned, a little more than 60 days away from that planned mothballing, for lack of a better term, it would be helpful between now and then to know from the local group if there's a priority schedule of buildings that you say, this one should definitely be, these four should definitely be maintained to the greatest extent possible. If there's a schedule or a tiered ranking like that, that would certainly be helpful, because I can revisit with our maintenance folks as well as construction and A&I maintenance folks on what the feasibility is. But Chairman Larson, as you mentioned, I think it will come down to who has the ability, the capacity, the staffing, and the funding to do that maintenance. Most of the folks that we have at the state hospital that are maintaining those buildings now will be brought over, to the administration building that's being handed over to us in the new campus next month. So that's kind of where our resources go. So it's a conversation we would need to have. But any ranking within these 14 buildings that could prioritize which ones would be the highest priority to maintain would be helpful. Thank you.
Any other committee comments, please? I might also ask Jerry, you and Ernie, and Mr. Hatch, has this conversation made sense on what our next steps, and if we're leaving something out, I'd appreciate your thoughts on that, because we're trying to establish the next steps and how to preserve and make sure and go through our process to do that. But have we left something out?
Chairman Larson, I think Chairman Dockstader had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman Dockstader.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Johansson brought up a very good point. I think that the ranking would be absolutely crucial, so he knows what he's dealing with. I think we butchered his budget pretty hard last time around, and so he needs to know just exactly what he's doing with, how he's going to approach it. I'd like to see some progress there. We get the buildings ranked, and we know what we're dealing with. There was a mention of the business council. We've got a business council person at the table. Process is you've got to get an application in. You got to have a business plan. You got to have things put together. I would say do that sooner than later. Don't hesitate. If it's life sciences or whatever it may be, have something in the works right now. And don't hesitate to go out yourself. We were trying for data centers because we have up in this end of Lincoln County, we have really high speed internet. So we were out chasing data centers for a while. And I can tell you that came out of my own pocket and my own time. A group of us, as we reached out, flew out to South Bend looking, inviting people in, paid their way in some cases. Don't hesitate to do any of that when you're trying to build something. It's not easy. We offered to those data centers great high-speed internet, great schools, great everything that went with it, great outdoors. We just didn't have a Walmart. You've got a Walmart across the street, so there you go. Let's get after it. Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so Jerry, did you want I'll go back to you and ask you if there's anything that we missed in this little, 'cause this is going to be a short-term list. We've got to make hay while we got a little daylight here. And so I'm going to give some pretty tight line assignments here. So if there's stuff we've missed, Jerry, please help me here.
Chairman Larson, thank you. I think that it's pretty straightforward. I think the task would be one, just making sure that we and the steering committee understand we don't want to overstate or understate what the potential is for the state to be to cooperate in the disposition of the land, whether it's as a partner or sell it takes legislation. We want to be open to that, so that when there are questions, if the steering committee or the community is talking to potential developers or others, that they're not falsely representing that they're clear in those expectations. The second part of that really is a task that I think in mothballing the buildings, we'll work with the steering committee to develop prioritization of those buildings and for you. And then I think it's a matter of just coordinating the timing and the scope of work and the budget. What's the cost in preparing those buildings to survive this next winter and give time for then the steering committee to go out and the business council and start looking for potential occupants or partners in this project.
So thank you. So if I may, and I hope our LSO staff I know is getting this down, but Senator Schuler, if I could ask you to, you're on the steering committee and on this task force. So if I could ask you to, let's identify the priority of the buildings, and we need to get that back to Director Joe. You know, if you can give that to me and we'll get with Director Johansson, we really need that by the end of the month. You know, today's the 18th, but we really don't have a lot of time there to work with because Director Johansson's working on his budget. We're going to have budget hearings in December. So that would give us 30 days in November that we could come back and maybe visit back and forth with the steering committee and Myers Anderson on this stuff. It would also give Nika some time to work with the business council on some of that approach. So could you accept that assignment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, and then I'll just note to the steering committee and to the committee as well that I reached out to Governor Gordon and just and planted the seed of because the executive branch is going to come into play here as well, what they see, what they envision for these historic buildings. And I've not heard back from him. I just done that in the last couple of days. And then the other reason for this short time frame is I'm trying to get this report needs to be in front of appropriations and the Health and Labor Committee. And that would give November and December to do that. And then we could work on some things. But I think the critical thing is to prioritize those buildings and then see what we do to keep them maintenance. We have a major maintenance contract in place to remove those boilers and to remove the fuel tanks supporting that. And so if we somehow elect to hold on and keep that generator running for a little bit, we need to postpone the removal of those fuel tanks or figure something else out. And so that's kind of why there's the urgency here. Is that fair? So I would entertain a motion by a member of the committee to move forward with what I just said. And then we'll vote on it.
So
I would
moved.
make that. Senator Baldwin, I'll make that motion, Chairman Larson. So we
Second.
move ahead with what we talked about and bring it back with that list as soon as we can get it.
Second.
Thank you. So members of the committee, so what we're proposing is that the steering committee will work to prioritize the buildings, and we'll get back to Department of Health on what those are, and then work forward with the Department of Construction to see what it would take to keep those buildings that you prioritized functioning as it relates to the deadline that we have for shutting those in, and then what we're going to recommend on the report. And so Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Meyer, we may be back to you. We may have to call you for some follow-up questions and stuff just off the, offline as we move forward in this.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My facility administrator in Evanston just reminded me the fuel tank removal is scheduled to happen in about 3 weeks. So I'm not sure that's feasible to back away from that at this point, but we can have that conversation offline if there is a need to delay.
Well, and we've got, and that's fair enough. And if fuel tanks is our biggest challenge, life's pretty good because we can always get, even for that size generator, and particularly with Evanston, with all its oil field related industries, I'm sure we can find a fuel tank there that'll work. So, but thank you for knowing that, because if we could do it without removal, it'd be nice. Okay. Leanne, did we make sense to you, or we confused you as I always do?
Mr. Chairman, that makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Rocco, you put a lot of work in this. Are you okay with where we landed?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir, I'm okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, never know unless we try. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that Representative Ayer looks like he's back from wherever he's been traveling from. He may want to say just a couple of things. I don't know how much he's been involved with, but I know he was on the original committee that kind of helped get the new facility up and running. So I didn't know if he wanted to offer anything or not. I just happened to see him up there.
Thank you. And correct me, Representative Ayer, I believe the hospital's in your district.
It actually is, yes.
Any
I've
thoughts?
actually been on the Zoom meeting about 4:15 I started, 2:15 your time. I'm in Vermont right now, visiting a daughter, but it was good to hear the discussion. I like the idea of finding out something we can do with that campus besides just letting it deteriorate or wait to nothing. I think the state would be better off, and the county and the city would all three be better off if we can find a good way to repurpose it. And I gotta believe with it's been mentioned before, the great expansion that's happening on the Wasatch Front and pushing our way, the right developer could just repurpose that into a wonderful facility of some kind that would be able to contribute to the tax revenues for you and the county and the city of Evanston, and turn it from an eyesore into a real show place. So I concur with what you suggested going forward here.
Thank you. Any other comments? Senator Dockstader.
Senator Schuler, sounds like you've been tasked with an assignment. Happy to help out wherever I can. You want to host some people there, show them around. I'd be happy to come down, help you, whatever I can do. We want to go out and chase some of it to bring it back in. Let's do that too. Let's not sit on our hands. Let's go to work on this. Okay.
And I would just echo that, Wendy. I'm happy to come down there. You know, we've just got to help Director Johansson figure out here. We've kind of put him in a place here that he wasn't anticipating, and we need to work through this and see how we can make this work. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're stressing him out a little bit, but just tell him it'll be okay.
My day would not be complete without stressing Director Johansson a little bit. So this feels really good. Okay. Anything else? Have we missed anything? Committee? Wendy, have we accomplished what you was hoping to get done here?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been great, and I appreciate all the steering committee members being here today to hear the conversation and hear the discussions and be a part of this, and appreciate all the work they put in. And again, for you guys taking the time, because I know this was kind of, we threw it together kind of quickly, but we knew that we needed to probably get it on the front burner instead of the back burner, so we could kind of start looking for potential funding and various other things. So thank you to Myers and Anderson and for all their work, and LSO, Director Johansson, and just appreciate all of you. Thanks so much.
So Jerry and Ernie and Jerry, if I could, Jerry and Ernie, if we could just, as you contemplate some of this stuff and look at the you know, I've been trying to think of a state-private relationship that we've had someplace else similar to this, and I can't think of one. I think it's a you know, that type of is a little bit different. When you look about incentives to bring people in, we don't have a state income tax. We don't have a corporate tax. You know, there's some uniqueness to our tax structure that I don't think a lot of other states have. And so when you talk about what can the state or the city provide, you know, those are really some of those incentives. You know, but anyway, just bear that in mind, and happy to talk to you. You guys feel free to call me anytime if you, any of the architect guys, if you want to call me anytime, feel free to do that, or Representative or Senator, any of us, frankly. So, okay, with that, Leanne Hogue, I think you can kick us all off Zoom, and we'll get to work. We've got a deadline. Wendy. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks all.